My name is Heather, I'm 35, and just 2 months after my husband's funeral, my own sister tried to take my house using a forged will. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on her in the most spectacular way, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started with a phone call, a sound I'd come to dread in the suffocating silence of my new life. For 2 months, my world had been muffled, wrapped in a thick, gray blanket of grief since Tim's accident. Then the phone buzzed, and a name flashed on the screen that felt like a relic from a past I no longer recognized: Jenny. My sister. When I finally found the strength to answer, her voice was like dripping honey, a sticky, artificial sweetness I knew from a lifetime of experience meant she was about to ask for something. "Heather," she chirped, her tone bright and brittle, a sound that grated against my raw nerves. "I know it's been so hard, but we all miss you terribly. We're having a small party for Matt's first birthday. Just family. You simply have to come. It's time for us to be a family again." I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. Family. The word felt like a foreign language. My family was Tim, and Tim was gone. His beautiful classic Mustang, the one he'd spent years restoring, was now a heap of crumpled metal in an impound lot. Our life together, all our meticulously crafted plans, had crumpled with it. The silence in our house, a home we'd bought with the profits from the tech business he'd started, was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was a business I had poured my own life into, contributing my entire salary from my marketing job for 2 years, my whole 401k, to give him the seed money he needed. I believed in him. We were a team. Our biggest project, the one that had consumed us for the better part of a decade, was trying to have a baby. My life had been a relentless cycle of injections, appointments, and 2-week waits that stretched into eternity. The hope was a physical entity, a balloon that would swell in my chest until it was so tight I could barely breathe, only to be violently popped, again and again, by a single-line test or a somber, pitying phone call from the doctor's office. It was a private, gnawing pain, a deep-seated feeling of failure that Jenny, my beautiful, popular, golden child sister, seemed to delight in exacerbating. Family gatherings were her stage, and my infertility was her favorite material. I remember one Thanksgiving, I was bloated and bruised from a fresh round of IVF hormones, and Jenny, patting her own effortlessly flat stomach, announced to the table, "Well, at least some of us are built for motherhood." My parents just chuckled, a harmless joke. Another time, after a devastating miscarriage, when I was barely holding myself together, she'd looked at Tim with a sly, sympathetic smile and said, "Maybe you just need a woman with working parts, Tim. Someone who can actually give you what you want." It was a dagger to the heart, and my parents did nothing. They worshipped her. When she'd gotten a big promotion at her law firm, they'd thrown her a lavish party. When I'd won a prestigious regional art award for my painting, they'd forgotten the date of the ceremony. My mother once told her best friend, not knowing I was in the next room, "Jenny is me, but with all the chances I never had. I have to make sure she gets everything." I was just the quiet, reliable, disappointing backdrop to Jenny's glittering life. But this invitation, this supposed olive branch, felt different. Maybe the shock of Tim's funeral had finally cracked through her perfect facade. Maybe loss had finally made her human. So, against every screaming instinct in my body, I said yes. I forced myself to drive to the mall, a place that felt alien and offensively loud, and walked into a high-end department store. I bought a ridiculously expensive sterling silver cutlery set for my nephew, Matt, a little boy I had never even been invited to meet. It was a peace offering. It was a white flag. A symbol that I was willing to try, one last time. Driving to my parents' house, a place I hadn't been since the funeral, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. My phone lit up. A text from Mark, Tim's best friend. It was short, just a few words: "Be careful today, Heather." I heard Jenny's planning something. A plan? What kind of plan? It seemed so paranoid, so dramatic. I was walking into my childhood home. I was surrounded by family. I pushed the unsettling thought away. What could possibly go wrong? The party was a full-blown spectacle. A massive white tent dominated my parents' manicured backyard. A catering staff bustled about with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. At least 50 people, all dressed in bright, cheerful pastels, mingled and laughed. I felt like a crow in my simple, knee-length black dress, a walking shadow of grief in a world that had already moved on. Jenny met me at the door, her smile a perfect, practiced curve that didn't reach her cold eyes. She gave me a kiss that was just a whisper of air beside my cheek, her attention already fixed on the gift bag in my hand. "Oh, how sweet of you to think of him," she murmured, taking the bag and placing it on a mountain of other brightly wrapped presents before turning away to greet someone she deemed more important. It was a dismissal so swift and complete it stole my breath. My parents were no better. A quick, tense hug from my mother, her body stiff in my arms. A brief, uncomfortable pat on the shoulder from my father. "Glad you could make it," he said, his eyes darting around the yard, already scanning for an escape. I was left alone on the edge of the patio, an island in a sea of forced merriment. I watched them, my mother laughing at someone's joke, my father deep in conversation about golf. My own family. I had never felt more profoundly, painfully alone. About an hour into this quiet torture, the cheerful pop music faded. Jenny stood on the patio, tapping a champagne flute with a knife, a radiant smile plastered on her face. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" she called out, her voice ringing with a practiced, performative joy. "Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate my darling Matt's first birthday. It means the world to us." The crowd applauded warmly. Jenny beamed, then her eyes swept the crowd and locked onto mine. A chill, sharp and sudden, snaked down my spine. This was it. The plan. "I have another little announcement to make," she said, her voice dropping into a more serious, dramatic register that commanded silence. "One that is long, long overdue." She took a theatrical breath, letting the silence hang in the air, thick with anticipation. "Many of you knew and loved my brother-in-law, Tim. He was a truly wonderful, generous man. So wonderful, in fact, that he and we shared a secret. A very deep, very powerful connection." A low, confused murmur rippled through the guests. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes turning towards me, a wave of pity and morbid curiosity. My heart started to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This couldn't be happening. "The truth is," Jenny declared, her voice cracking with expertly faked emotion, "Tim is Matt's biological father." The world stopped. A collective, audible gasp sucked all the air out of the tent. My ears roared with a high-pitched whine. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of me, leaving me gasping. "And," she went on, her voice now a sickening, syrupy mix of triumph and faux sympathy, "Tim was an honorable man. He wanted to do the right thing by his son. He left a will." She held up a folded, official-looking document, waving it like a victory flag. "He left half of his entire inheritance, including the $990,000 house he shared with Heather, to our son. So, as Matt's mother and legal guardian, I will be taking what is rightfully ours." She walked towards me then, a predator closing in on its stunned prey, and pushed the document into my numb hands. I looked down. It was thick, creamy paper, embossed with a law firm's letterhead. And at the bottom, there it was. Tim's signature, bold and familiar. The world tilted violently on its axis. I looked up from the paper, into her gleaming, triumphant eyes, and I said, my voice a strange, hollow whisper that didn't sound like my own, "Oh, I see." And then I had to fight, with every ounce of my being, with every fiber of my soul, not to laugh. Because my husband had a secret, all right. But it wasn't the one Jenny had staked her entire future on. Jenny's performance was masterful. She had a captive audience, and she was playing the part of a lifetime, the grieving secret lover, the protective mother fighting for her child's custody and birthright. To seal her narrative, she turned and pointed to a large flat-screen TV my parents had conveniently set up on the patio. Suddenly, it flickered to life. A slideshow began, a poison pen letter to my marriage. There was Jenny and Tim, heads close together at a fancy restaurant I'd never been to. There they were again, laughing, his arm draped casually around her in front of a rustic stone fireplace that wasn't in our home. Then came the text messages, blown up for all to see, a curated collection of deceit. "Can't stop thinking about you," one read, supposedly from Tim's phone. "Soon we can be a real family, I promise," read another. It was a meticulously constructed fantasy, a public execution of my marriage and my memory of the man I had loved. My head swam. I stumbled back, looking for an anchor in the swirling sea of shocked and pitying faces, and my eyes landed on my parents. My last hope. I searched their faces for denial, for outrage, for any sign that they were on my side, that this was all a horrible mistake. I found none. My mother stood with her arm wrapped protectively around Jenny's shoulders, a pillar of solidarity. My father just stared at the perfectly manicured lawn, the absolute picture of cowardice. I pushed through the crowd, a path parting before me as if I were a leper. I stood right in front of them. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice raw with a pain so deep it felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. My mother finally looked at me, and her eyes were not filled with sympathy, but with a cold, hard resolve. "We know, Heather," she said, her voice low and firm, meant only for me, a final, intimate betrayal. "Jenny told us about the affair 7 months ago. We didn't want to hurt you. You were already going through so much with the infertility treatments. The years of shots, of appointments, of hope and despair that had defined my life. They had known. They had known for 7 months, while I was still married, while Tim was still alive. They had watched me plan his funeral, they had held me while I cried, they had listened to me talk about my lonely future, all the while knowing this dagger was waiting to be plunged into my back. They weren't just bystanders, they were co-conspirators. A strange thing happened in that moment. The pain, so sharp and blinding it felt like it would tear me in two, suddenly receded. In its place, a layer of ice formed around my heart, clear and hard and cold. A profound, chilling clarity. I looked at Jenny's smug, victorious face. I looked at my mother's defiant one. I looked at my father's pathetic, downcast eyes. And I saw them for what they truly were. Not family. Strangers. Enemies. I didn't say another word. I didn't scream or cry. I simply turned my back on the whole pathetic, theatrical scene. I didn't run. I walked, each step deliberate and steady, through the stunned crowd, out the front door, and into the clean, quiet air of the street. As I closed the car door, shutting out the sound of their lies for the last time, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war. The first official volley of that war arrived 3 days later. A thick, cream-colored envelope, delivered by a grim-faced courier, from a law firm whose name on the letterhead was synonymous with ruthless, high-priced legal battles. Inside, the language was cold, sharp, and merciless. It was a formal demand, citing the will presented by their client, Ms. Jennifer Evans, and instructing me to begin proceedings to liquidate all assets held jointly with my late husband. It stated that a 50% share was to be placed in a trust for her son, and that any failure to comply would result in immediate legal action. It was a declaration of war, and the will Jenny had flourished was its terrifying centerpiece. My own lawyer, a kind, semi-retired man named Mr. Gable who had handled our house closing, looked grave. He spread the papers across his large oak desk, his brow furrowed in deep lines of concern. "Heather, this is a very aggressive firm," he said, tapping the letterhead with his pen. "They're known for scorched earth tactics. And this will," he sighed, adjusting his glasses. "It looks legitimate. The signature appears to be Tim's. With the photographic evidence you described, and your parents' willingness to testify against you, this will be a brutal, expensive fight. It'll be like a divorce and a custody battle all rolled into one. Frankly," he said, meeting my eyes with a look of deep pity, "our chances are not good." Then the psychological warfare began. My parents, no longer hiding behind whispers, launched a full-scale campaign of guilt. They left long, rambling voicemails, their voices thick with a false, cloying sincerity. "Heather, you need to think of the child," my father's voice boomed from my speakerphone, full of a self-righteousness that made my stomach turn. "A boy needs his father's legacy. It's the right and moral thing to do." My mother was more direct, her words like shards of glass. "Don't be so selfish. You couldn't give Tim a child. Jenny did. That boy deserves his inheritance. Don't let your jealousy stand in the way of his future, of a good college fund." They were trying to gaslight me into submission, to paint me as the villain of their story, a bitter, childless widow, consumed by envy, denying an innocent child his birthright. And the poison of their words started to work. I began to wander through my own house like a ghost, seeing betrayal in every corner. Had he been on the phone with her in this very room? Had he been texting her while lying next to me in our bed? The doubt was an acid, eating away at every good memory I had left, tainting everything with suspicion. I forced myself to log into our joint bank account online. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. A cash withdrawal. $10,000. It was made 4 days before Tim's accident. A trip? A secret purchase? Or was it a gift for his other family? That was my breaking point. I slid down the wall in my office, the room where Tim and I had dreamed up his business, and I shattered. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the life we had built, and I sobbed, great, heaving, ugly sobs that tore through my body until I was empty and hoarse. I felt utterly, completely alone, hunted by my own blood. I was ready to surrender. I was ready to sign the papers, give them the house, the money, anything to make the pain and the fight stop. And then, as I sat there in the dark, my phone, which I'd thrown across the room, buzzed from under a pile of papers. An unknown number. I almost let it go, let it drown in the silence. But some instinct, some flicker of a fight I didn't know I had left, made me crawl across the floor and answer it. My voice was a raw, broken whisper. "Hello? Heather? It's Win. Winifred. Tim's mother. My mother-in-law." I had been avoiding her, avoiding everyone, drowning in my own sea of misery. Her voice was like a steel rod, sharp and clear and utterly devoid of pity. It was exactly what I needed. "I just got off the phone with your mother," she said, her tone clipped with a fury that seemed to vibrate through the phone. "She called to tell me to convince you to do the right thing. I heard what that venomous sister of yours did. Now you listen to me. You stop crying and you listen. Do not believe a single word. My son loved you. But there was something about him, a secret he kept from everyone, a secret he was too proud, too stubborn to ever admit. He kept it to protect his honor, and I think, to protect you. But now, it's time to use it to protect his name." A single, tiny flame flickered to life in the frozen, desolate cavern of my chest. For the first time in 2 months, I felt a surge of something other than grief. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. It was hope. Win's words were the lifeline I was seconds away from giving up on. The secret, she explained over the phone, her voice a low, steady anchor in my storm, was buried 15 years in the past, back in Tim's reckless college days. He'd been in a terrible car accident, a head-on collision that had nearly killed him. He'd recovered, and it became a story he'd occasionally tell at parties, a cautionary tale about youthful stupidity. But there was a chapter of that story he never told anyone. Not his friends, not his sister, not even me. The surgery to repair the severe internal damage had been complex and life-saving. But it had come at a cost. Win, a meticulous, almost obsessive keeper of all family records, had the entire medical file locked away in a safe deposit box. The final, multi-page report from his surgeon contained a single, devastating sentence that would become my salvation: the trauma and subsequent reconstructive surgery had left him completely and permanently sterile. He could never have children. The air left my lungs in a single, painful rush. All those years. All those doctor's appointments where we'd sat side by side, holding hands so tightly our knuckles were white, as they talked about unexplained infertility. He had let me believe the problem was mine, or ours, a cruel twist of genetic fate. Wynne explained, her voice softening for the first time, that he'd been too ashamed, too proud to tell me. He saw how desperately I wanted to be a mother, and he couldn't bear to be the one to tell me it was an impossible dream. He thought he was protecting me from the finality of that truth. It was a misguided, heartbreaking act of love, and it had caused me years of private anguish, but it was also the key. It was the truth. And the truth was about to become my weapon. Jenny's entire scheme, her child, her fraudulent will, her future, was built on a foundation of sand, on a biological impossibility. The thick fog of grief and doubt that had clouded my mind for months began to burn away, replaced by a sharp, cold focus. This was no longer just about defending myself or my home. This was about defending Tim's memory from the vultures who were trying to pick it clean. Wynne, I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks, the broken whisper replaced by a tone of tempered steel. Can you get me those records? They're already being overnight to your lawyer, she replied, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. And so is Gina. Gina, Tim's older sister, was at my door the next afternoon. She was a force of nature, a high-powered corporate lawyer from Chicago with a personality that could strip paint off walls. She didn't offer condolences, she offered a battle plan. She hugged me hard, a hug that felt like it was transferring some of her own strength to me, then sat at my kitchen table, her eyes like chips of ice. I never, ever trusted that sister of yours, she said, her voice laced with a contempt that was strangely comforting. She was always hanging around Tim, showing up at his office uninvited, acting like a lovesick teenager. He told me about it a few times. He said she was harassing him, sending him inappropriate messages, acting obsessive. He didn't want to tell you because he knew what it would do to your relationship with your parents. He was trying to keep the peace, the poor, noble fool. She pulled out her phone. He was frustrated enough one night that he forwarded me some of her texts and saved a couple of her voicemails. He wanted a record of it, just in case. Listen to this. She pressed play. It was Jenny's voice, but not the confident, chirpy one I knew. This voice was wheedling, desperate, almost unhinged. Tim, why won't you call me back? I know you feel it too. I can see it in your eyes. Just give me a chance. We could be so good together. It wasn't the sound of a lover, it was the sound of a stalker. We now had an arsenal. The irrefutable medical records. The sworn testimony of Tim's surgeon, who Gina had already contacted and who had agreed to testify. The voicemails proving Jenny's harassment. And the full, unwavering support of Tim's real family. When I walked into Mr. Gable's office the next day with Gina by my side and laid everything out on his desk, his entire demeanor changed. The cautious, grim-faced man disappeared, replaced by a smiling predator who smelled blood in the water. Heather, he said, leaning back in his chair with a grin that was both terrifying and wonderful. This is no longer a defense. This is a demolition. But Jenny, blinded by a lifetime of getting her own way, had no idea the ground was about to open up and swallow her whole. When my lawyer sent a formal, blistering letter rejecting her claim and alluding to significant counter-evidence, she doubled down. She launched a full-scale smear campaign, creating anonymous social media profiles to post lies about me, painting me as a cold, unloving, career-obsessed wife who had driven my lonely husband into her loving, fertile arms. The phone calls escalated, coming at all hours of the night, silent calls that were somehow more menacing than threats. She even had the audacity to approach my next-door neighbor, a sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, and offer her $5,000 to lie and say she'd seen Jenny's car at our house late at night on multiple occasions. Mrs. Gable, bless her heart, had told Jenny where she could shove her money and had called me immediately. The final showdown wasn't in a chaotic, public courtroom, but in the cold, quiet, wood-paneled conference room of Jenny's own high-priced law firm. It was for a deposition, a formal, high-stakes proceeding where every word spoken is under oath and carries the full weight of court testimony. The air in the room was thick with tension, so heavy you could taste it. Jenny sat on one side of the massive, polished mahogany table, looking serene and confident in a crisp white suit, the very picture of wronged motherhood. She was flanked by her smug, expensive lawyer and my parents, who were positioned behind her like stone gargoyles, there to lend their silent, damning support to her lies. I sat opposite them, with Mr. Gable and Gina by my side. I felt a strange, preternatural calm. The fear was gone, burned away by a cold, righteous anger. I was ready. Jenny's lawyer, a man with silver hair and a condescending smile, began. He was smooth and practiced, leading Jenny through her fabricated story with a gentle, paternal air. She recounted her tale of a passionate, secret love affair with a sad, misunderstood man who was trapped in a loveless marriage. She wept on cue when describing how Tim, in a moment of profound love and clarity, had signed the will, promising to start a new life with her and their son as soon as he could arrange the divorce. My parents, when questioned, corroborated her story with solemn nods and feigned sadness, their faces masks of sorrowful sincerity. I let them spin their web. I watched them lie, under oath, one after another, digging their own graves with every word. My silence, my lack of reaction, seemed to unnerve them. They had expected tears, hysterics, a breakdown. They didn't know what to do with my stillness. Finally, it was our turn. Mr. Gable, calm and methodical, leaned forward. Ms. Evans, he began, his voice polite but edged with steel, for the record, could you please confirm the exact date you allege your intimate relationship with Mr. Miller began? Confident, she gave a date from 18 months prior. And could you confirm, under oath, that this document, he said, sliding a pristine copy of the fraudulent will across the table, the paper gliding silently over the polished wood, was signed by Mr. Miller on the date specified, in your presence? Yes, she said, smiling sweetly, a look of pity on her face as if I were a poor, delusional creature. It was a beautiful, emotional day. He cried. Thank you, my lawyer said. He paused, letting her lie hang in the air for a moment before he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document. He placed it on the table with a heavy, definitive thud that made everyone in the room jump. This, he announced to the court reporter in the room at large, is Mr. Timothy Miller's complete medical file from St. Jude's University Hospital, dating back 15 years. I would like to draw your attention to page 47, the post-operative report filed by Dr. Alistair Finch. It concludes, and I quote, due to extensive and irreparable damage to the patient's reproductive system, the patient is rendered permanently and completely sterile. Silence. A silence so profound you could hear the frantic ticking of the clock on the wall. The color drained from Jenny's face, leaving it a pasty, chalk-white mask of horror. Her lawyer snatched the document, his own smug confidence evaporating as his eyes flew across the page. This is a forgery. It's fake. You faked it. Jenny shrieked, her voice cracking, the carefully constructed facade of the grieving mother shattering into a million pieces. Is it? My lawyer countered, his voice dangerously quiet. He slid a second, smaller file across the table. Because this is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Finch, a respected surgeon for 30 years, confirming the authenticity of that report. He is on standby to testify in court, and he is very much looking forward to it. He leaned back, but he wasn't done. He was just getting started. Furthermore, he said, nodding to Gina, who calmly pressed a button on a small digital recorder placed in the center of the table. Tim's voice, strained and angry, suddenly filled the silent room, a ghost come back to haunt his tormentor. Gina, it's me. Jenny showed up at my office again. I don't know what to do. She's not listening. She keeps talking about us having a future. My lawyer let the recording play out, every desperate, wheedling word from Jenny's own mouth echoing in the tomb-like room. Then he turned his icy gaze back to her. Given that Mr. Miller was biologically incapable of fathering your child, and given that this will is predicated on that fraudulent claim, and supported by what appears to be a forged signature, you have not only brought a frivolous lawsuit, but you have committed multiple felonies, including perjury and document forgery. We are, of course, prepared to file a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. The dam broke. Ginny lunged across the table, a wild animal trapped and cornered, screaming that I was a liar, a witch, that we had faked everything. Her lawyer was frantically trying to silence her, his own face pale with the realization of how badly he had been played. My mother burst into loud, ugly, theatrical sobs, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. My father just sat there, his face ashen, looking like a man who had just watched his own life burn down around him. He finally understood. They had bet everything on a lie, and they had just lost it all, spectacularly and irrevocably. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The lawsuit was withdrawn before we even left the building, a hasty retreat to stave off the impending criminal charges. In the sterile quiet of the marble hallway outside the conference room, my parents intercepted me, their faces ravaged with a desperate, pathetic panic. "Heather, please," my father stammered, reaching for my arm. I pulled away as if his touch were fire. "We didn't know. We swear. She lied to us, she tricked all of us." I stopped and looked at them, really looked at them, for the last time. The anger was gone, the pain was gone. All I felt was a vast, cold emptiness. "You weren't tricked," I said, my voice quiet and even, devoid of all emotion. "You were investors. You saw what you thought was a better opportunity, a better daughter, and you invested in my sister's greed. Your investment just went bankrupt. Don't ever speak to me again." I turned and walked away, with Gina and Win on either side of me, my true family. I didn't look back. I left them there in the wreckage of the family they had so carelessly, so cruelly, broken. The year that followed was one of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. I sold the house, the one filled with so many good memories that had been tainted by so many bad ones. I moved into a beautiful apartment downtown, with a small balcony overlooking the city, a space that was mine and mine alone. Win and Gina became my anchors, my true north. We weren't a family born of blood, but one forged in the fires of betrayal and loyalty. We spent holidays together, we cooked dinners, and they were the ones who encouraged me to finally unpack my dusty canvases and start painting again. News travels fast in a small community. Jenny, facing a criminal investigation for forgery and perjury, took a plea deal that left her with a felony record, 5 years of probation, and crippling legal debt. To pay her lawyers, my parents were forced to sell their big, beautiful house, the one where all our bitter memories were made. They moved into a small, sad-looking condo on the other side of the state. They were pariahs, ghosts in their own lives, haunted by the consequences of their choices. But my story wasn't about their destruction. It was about my own creation. I realized that all the pain, the years of feeling less than, of feeling broken, could be repurposed. It could be fuel. Using the money from Tim's actual inheritance, the money he had worked so hard for, I did something I know he would have been proud of. I started a foundation in his name, the Miller Grant for Family Justice. It's a small non-profit, but a mighty one. We provide pro bono legal resources and financial aid to women who are being victimized by financial abuse and inheritance theft within their own families. At the Foundation's first fundraising luncheon, I stood at a podium, looking out at a room full of supporters, of survivors. Win and Gina were at the front table, watching me with tears of pride in their eyes. I told my story, my voice clear and strong. I spoke of betrayal, not with bitterness, but as the catalyst that had shown me what true family means. It's not about blood. It's about loyalty. It's about who shows up when the world turns its back on you. My life today is not the one I spent years dreaming of while staring at negative pregnancy tests. It's something else entirely. It's richer, it's stronger, and it's authentically mine. I found my purpose, not in my ability to create a child, but in my power to help others fight their own battles. And in that work, in that community, I found a sense of peace, a sense of self, that had eluded me for my entire life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe in the power of turning our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths. Have you ever found an unexpected purpose on the other side of pain? I'd love to read about it in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Remember, you are stronger than you think.